29 years old, the night I sat alone in my brand new office, brushing confetti off a floor no one had stepped on. The space still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I had spent months focused on every detail, from the glass walled conference room to the espresso machine in the kitchen. This was meant to be the most important night of my life, the official launch of my company, something I had worked toward for nearly 10 years. Yet, the chairs were empty. The catered food sat untouched, except for the small plate I ate so it wouldn't be wasted. My name is James, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. I kept the peace, showed up to every event, and loaned money even when it meant surviving on instant noodles for weeks. My younger brother, Kyle, was always the favorite. No matter what he did, it was framed as ambition, charm, or simply his personality. When Kyle dropped out of college after 2 semesters, my parents said he was finding himself. When he went through 3 jobs in 1 year, they said he just hadn't discovered his passion yet. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts at a warehouse, paid my own way through school, and lived in a studio apartment barely large enough for a bed and desk. Every dollar I saved went into one goal: starting a real company. Not a side project, not a hobby. A registered business with employees, clients, and office space built to last. So when I finally signed the lease and opened the doors, I believed my family would be proud. I sent digital invitations weeks ahead of time and even printed physical ones for my parents, knowing they'd say they missed the email. I arranged champagne, music, and a short speech to thank everyone who had supported me. At 6 o'clock, I stood by the entrance in my only decent suit, waiting for the first familiar face. At 6:15, I told myself they were running late. At 7, I refreshed my phone. No calls, no texts. At 8, I quietly told the caterer to pack up the food. I didn't cry. I sat at one of the desks, sipping warm champagne from a plastic cup, listening to the sound echo in the empty space. All I could think was that after everything I had done for them, they couldn't show up for one night. Then my phone buzzed. A photo appeared in the family group chat. Kyle and my parents were standing around a new barbecue grill, laughing with drinks in their hands. The caption read, "Housewarming success." I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology, no congratulations, just a casual announcement that they had chosen Kyle's event over my company launch without hesitation. I didn't respond. I cleaned up the decorations, shut off the lights, and went home. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mother. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." I stared at the screen as my coffee went cold. A cut of what? Kyle hadn't invested anything, hadn't helped, and hadn't even shown up. My business hadn't made $1 yet, but somehow he was already entitled to it. I didn't reply immediately. I felt exhausted, not just from the night before, but from years of being taken for granted. I already knew how the conversation would go. Mom would say family comes first. Dad would say Kyle needed it more. Kyle would list reasons why his involvement deserved compensation. For the first time, something hardened inside me. That message wasn't just a request. It was a warning. And I had a choice. I didn't respond that day or the next. Instead, I watched the group chat fill with more photos from Kyle's housewarming, more jokes I wasn't part of. Each one added fuel to a quiet frustration I couldn't ignore. By the end of the week, Mom sent another message. "James, answer your phone. This is important." When I finally did, she launched straight in, skipping any greeting. I stayed silent long enough for her to notice. "You're asking about profits," I said carefully. "But none of you came to my company launch." There was a long pause. She eventually responded in the same patient, dismissive tone she'd used my whole life. "You know how important Kyle's housewarming was. Everyone was there. We couldn't split the family for one night." "One night," I repeated. "This wasn't a dinner. This was my business launch." She sighed, accusing me of overreacting. Kyle was starting his life. I'd have other chances. Then she returned to profits. I laughed briefly. "There are no profits. I haven't even finished onboarding clients." She continued anyway, saying Kyle believed he had inspired me and deserved a founder's share, or at least discounted services. That stopped me completely. Inspired me? I had planned this since college. Kyle barely knew what I was working on, but she brushed past that, reminding me that I was single, without kids, and could afford to be generous. "Helping the family," she said. I ended the call. That was when I realized this wasn't going to resolve itself. They didn't see my company as mine. They saw it as a shared resource, and Kyle was first in line. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Kyle messaged asking for a partnership package in exchange for promotion, followed by another message saying Mom thought I'd agree. I didn't reply. Mom called, accusing me of ignoring Kyle. She framed his demands as help. The group chat told another story. Photos of purchases funded by my parents, conversations about my money, all happening in front of me. Then came the invitation to Kyle's networking barbecue. They skipped my launch, but now I was expected to attend his event and promote myself to his friends. I didn't go. 2 weeks later, my accountant emailed me. Someone using my mother's email had asked about adding a family partner to my business account. I called her immediately. She said she was just trying to help by letting Kyle manage finances. I told her calmly and clearly to never do that again. This company was mine. She accused me of being territorial. I didn't believe her intentions anymore. The next message from Kyle was about a new purchase and another reminder about a family discount. I didn't respond. Instead, I started reviewing every shared account and service connected to my name. 2 weeks passed. I focused on onboarding clients and growing the business. I hoped the tension would cool. It didn't. One Saturday morning, my phone rang nonstop. Then my security system flagged multiple failed login attempts from a location near my parents' home. I called my mother. She admitted they had tried to access my systems to help. I lost my patience. They had crossed a line. She accused me of being ungrateful. I reminded her I paid for my own education and built the company alone. She accused me of hoarding success. I hung up. Kyle followed with a text demanding I stop making him look bad. That's when I realized this wasn't about misunderstanding. They truly believed they were entitled to my work. By Monday, my father sent a handwritten letter proposing a 15% of my company's revenue, not profits. Revenue. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every time I had bailed Kyle out and every sacrifice I had made. The final incident came when I caught Kyle outside my office trying to access the building. He dismissed it as family privilege. I told him if it happened again, I would call the police. That was the line. I locked everything down. This was no longer about setting boundaries. It was about protecting what I built. The following Monday, I sat alone at my kitchen table, listening to voicemail accusations and watching steam rise from my coffee. For years, I had put their comfort ahead of my own. Now it was destroying me. I cried quietly, not out of anger, but exhaustion. That day, I decided I was done trying to earn approval that would never come. The silence that followed didn't stop, but it gave me clarity. And for the first time, I understood that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. If you want next, I can. Tighten pacing for narration. Split this into YouTube chapters. Write a matching title and description. Optimize for AI voiceover. Just tell me the next move. Mom showed up at my apartment one afternoon, knocking as if she owned the place. When I opened the door slightly, she immediately started. James, this is childish. You can't keep shutting us out just because you're upset. Your brother is hurt. He was only trying to help. Trying to help by breaking into my office? I asked, voice tired. You're exaggerating, she waved dismissively. He just wanted to see the space. You should feel flattered. He cares enough to get involved. For the first time, I didn't feel the usual pull of guilt, just distance. I'm busy, I said, shutting the door before she could respond. Leaning against it, my heart raced, but there was a strange flicker of relief. The following weekend, I skipped a major family dinner that had been planned for months. Mom sent me 20 texts in a row, everything from guilt trips about my grandmother asking about me, to anger, veiled threats, and warnings. If you keep this up, don't expect our support when things get tough. I didn't reply. The silence had a cost. Work became harder. I was constantly exhausted, replaying imagined arguments. I stopped sleeping through the night, waking at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking about Kyle smirking outside my office. I was irritable with employees, impatient with friends, clumsy with small tasks. One night, I stayed at the office until dawn, running numbers, terrified that something would fail, and that my family would say, "See, this is why you need us." Gradually, though, clarity began to emerge from the fear and exhaustion. One Friday night, I sat with a notepad and started writing. Not emails or tasks, just a list. Every account in my name that my family could access, every shared bill, every streaming service, even old accounts with Kyle or my parents as secondary users. Then, every way they could interfere with my business. Access attempts, calls to vendors, uninvited visits. This wasn't a simple to-do list. It was a blueprint. I realized that if I didn't take control, this behavior would never end. I spent the weekend executing that plan. I added security measures to my bank accounts, enabled two-factor authentication on every platform, moved savings to a new account, and spoke with my attorney to lock down company documents so no changes could happen without my consent. Each step made me feel lighter. By Sunday night, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the office ceiling, and felt calm for the first time in months. I wasn't reacting to my family. I was preparing. And I knew this was only the start. It's strange how much lighter life feels when you stop seeking approval. After that weekend, I stopped waiting for messages from mom or dad, stopped replaying arguments, and stopped worrying about what they said in the group chat. Instead, I focused on what I could control and build. The next Monday, I arrived before sunrise. The city was quiet, and for the first time in months, I felt excited. I made coffee, sat with my notebook, and mapped the next 3 months of growth. Early clients were small, but referrals started to come, leading to bigger contracts that could stabilize finances for a year. Without my family's constant interference, I was sharper, more focused. One major client, a mid-sized firm, finally signed after our pitch meeting. The CEO shook my hand. "James, you clearly care about what you're building. That's why we're choosing you." I left grinning, stayed late to run the numbers, and realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was growth. Over the next weeks, I invested in office improvements, hired a part-time assistant, and brought in a consultant to streamline operations. The business ran smoother, and I felt proud, not just of revenue, but of my confidence. I no longer felt small when Mom or Kyle messaged. I even ignored them entirely. Mom left a long, dramatic voicemail urging reconciliation. I listened twice, deleted it, and returned to a contract worth more than my first 3 clients combined. Kyle, surprisingly, texted with a question, not a demand. "Hey bro, do you know anyone hiring? Things are tight." I could have gloated, but instead replied, "No, sorry, things are busy here." That silence shifted the power dynamic. I no longer needed to justify myself. Text messages from family escalated. Requests for money, family trip expenses, and vague claims of fairness. But I didn't respond. I focused on growth. Within months, revenue doubled. The company moved to a larger office. I upgraded equipment, hired a junior project manager, and finally felt like a real CEO. Next, I secured my assets. I set up a holding company for intellectual property, updated my will, and made sure no one could claim any part of my business without going through legal layers. Each step made me stronger and more in control. Meanwhile, my family's attempts escalated. Mom sent guilt-laden emails, Kyle posted vague rants, Dad called about family finances, and Kyle even appeared outside my office. But the upgraded security prevented access. I saved video footage, knowing they would try again. By spring, the company was in its best shape. Small but loyal team, recurring contracts, stable cash flow. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a shield. My attorney added clauses to prevent family interference, which felt essential after everything. Then a tip came from a family friend. Kyle was planning ahead to make himself a partner. I stopped in my tracks, realizing he intended to act without my knowledge. That weekend, I reopened the group chat, not to respond, but to observe. And there it was. If you want, I can also make a YouTube-ready version of this script, with tighter phrasing and natural pauses for voiceover narration, while keeping it the same length. It would be ideal for a 10 to 15-minute video. Do you want me to do that next? Mom said they were planning a family meeting the following weekend to talk about some promising opportunities. Kyle sounded eager, saying he couldn't wait to explain what he had been working on. Dad added that I really should attend, emphasizing that it could benefit everyone. I ended the call and felt a shift inside me. For months, I had been defensive, putting up barriers, limiting contact, and doing everything I could to keep them from interfering. Now, that dynamic had changed. I had leverage. The reality was simple. My company was no longer a fragile startup. It was profitable, stable, and after restructuring, I was the only person with legal authority to make decisions. Even if Kyle walked into a lawyer's office claiming he deserved a share, there was nothing legally to support it. And the most important part was that they didn't know this yet. That evening, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and started writing. This wasn't casual note taking, it was planning. I listed every remaining connection between me and my family, shared accounts, services, points of access, and any financial overlap. Next to each one, I outlined how to separate it carefully, gradually, and without drawing attention. I also began evaluating my company differently, not just as a source of income, but as a protected structure. I asked myself what was required to make it completely secure. I upgraded the security system again, this time adding biometric access. My attorney drafted formal documents preventing any family member from ever holding shares or voting rights. I also consulted a public relations contact about handling any attempt to involve the company in a public dispute and how to respond proactively. Step by step, I was creating an environment where my family had no leverage over me. Then, something unexpected happened that gave me an additional advantage. One of my new clients was a real estate developer who, as it turned out, was negotiating with Kyle for a renovation contract. During a meeting, the developer casually mentioned Kyle's name and asked if we were related. I kept my expression neutral and confirmed it. The developer laughed and said Kyle was asking for advance funding, claiming he was reliable because his family business was doing so well. He said Kyle mentioned a brother who owned a company that could support him if needed. I didn't correct the assumption. I simply acknowledged it and took note. At that moment, I realized I had influence Kyle wasn't aware of. Quiet influence, the kind that didn't require confrontation, only clarity at the right moment. By the time the family meeting arrived, I was prepared both emotionally and strategically. I had documents proving sole ownership. I had security records showing attempted interference. I had financial reports detailing my contributions to the company's success. Most importantly, I had the confidence to know I could handle whatever happened. The night before the meeting, I stayed late in my office, looking at the space I had built from nothing. The concrete floors, the steady hum of servers, and the city lights outside reminded me that this was mine. The preparation was complete. All that remained was to see how they would proceed. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, the same place where I had spent years sitting quietly while Kyle took center stage. This time felt different. I arrived on time, wearing a suit, composed and focused. When Mom opened the door, she looked surprised and commented on how formal I looked. I replied calmly that this was a business discussion. Kyle was already seated at the table, relaxed and confident. Dad sat at the head, appearing serious. He welcomed everyone and suggested we speak openly. Kyle immediately began presenting his proposal. He explained that he had an opportunity but needed startup funds. Once successful, it would help the whole family. He suggested my company contribute a small percentage of monthly revenue in exchange for partnership status. Mom agreed enthusiastically, saying this was what working together looked like. I listened without interrupting. When they finished, I slid a folder across the table. Dad asked what it was. I explained it contained my company's operating agreement, ownership records, and financials, all confirming that I was the sole founder and decision maker. I made it clear there would be no partnership, revenue sharing, or ongoing financial support. Kyle tried to dismiss the formality, saying we were family. I responded that formality was necessary because previous informal arrangements had led to unauthorized access attempts, office intrusions, and a written demand for a percentage of my revenue. Mom tried to deflect responsibility, but I stated I had documentation. I also made it clear that any future attempts would involve law enforcement. The room fell silent. Dad questioned whether I was serious. I confirmed I was and explained that this was not a threat, but a boundary. Kyle tried to minimize it, suggesting I had changed because of money. I replied calmly that I had learned I didn't owe anyone access to my success. I then placed several documents on the table, termination notices for shared accounts and services. I explained that all remaining financial connections were being ended immediately. Mom was shocked. Kyle became visibly angry. He accused me of being controlling. I told him he wanted control without effort, and that arrangement was over. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I stood, collected my materials, and said the discussion was finished. I explained that any future relationship would require respect. Otherwise, this would be the last meeting of this kind. I left without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, I reinforced those boundaries. When Kyle mentioned my company to potential clients, they contacted me for confirmation. I clarified there was no partnership. Those deals fell apart. When Mom sent messages meant to provoke guilt, I didn't respond. When she finally called, I told her calmly that I was busy running the company they had ignored. Word spread. Family friends reached out quietly to express understanding. Some even said they were proud of me. The more pressure I faced, the calmer I became. I didn't argue or explain. I simply maintained consistent boundaries. Over time, the messages slowed. The demands stopped. They began to realize that the version of me they could manipulate no longer existed. Then the fallout arrived. One morning, a contractor called to confirm whether I was backing Kyle financially. I stated clearly that my company was not involved and advised them to get everything in writing. Later that day, Kyle called, furious, accusing me of costing him a contract. I replied calmly that he had done that himself by misrepresenting my company. I ended the call. Within weeks, Kyle lost additional clients. His reputation suffered. Meanwhile, my company continued to grow. We secured new contracts, expanded the team, and moved into a larger office. Eventually, Mom invited me to a family barbecue. When I arrived, the tension was obvious. She said they wanted to move past everything and emphasized that family mattered more than money. I pointed out that money had been the only focus for months. She disagreed, but I reminded them of missed milestones, account access attempts, and financial demands. Dad asked for forgiveness. I explained that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or allowing continued exploitation. Kyle accused me of thinking I was superior. I told him I had simply stopped being his fallback option. I addressed them all, stating clearly that I built my company independently and that their attempts to benefit from it were over. There would be no shared business interests or financial ties. Any relationship going forward would be personal, not transactional. I added that any future boundary violations would be treated as trespassing. I left without further discussion. Driving home, I felt a sense of peace that was solid and lasting. That night, alone in my office, I reflected on how much I had given up in the past to maintain harmony.